It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show / MLB Early Live Before Lock. Shit my money, Adam Scherer. Now we're going to be talking about the MLB main slate for the first part of the show, and then stick around after that because then we'll be doing a Live Before Lock segment for the last 30 minutes or so, talking about the 5-game early slate on DraftKings, 4-game early slate on FanDuel. Today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. Now, Adam, we have to start with this. How did you deal with the weather yesterday?
So I took actually a weird approach. In my tournament lineups, I ended up not playing DeGrom, and in cash, I did play him, which I think was kind of counterintuitive because obviously there was a lot of risk with the weather. But my thinking was that in cash, he was just going to be really popular, and it might not matter that much. He was like 75 to 80% owned in cash, so it really didn't matter that much. I lost, but it wasn't because of him really. In tournaments, it obviously helped out a lot that half the field had him and I didn't. So I still don't really know if that was the right approach, but it made sense to me at the time. I'm not really upset that I did it that way. What did you do?
Well, I was under anesthesia for the afternoon. I was unconscious. I came home and then I slept the rest of the day because I had a colonoscopy yesterday. So I had no clue what was going on the slate, but I do know I live close to New York City and it poured the entire day and night. So at least based on that, like I looked online, I was surprised, like, oh, this many people played Jacob deGrom because we just had crazy thunderstorms the entire night. So I don't know what the weather report looked like early in the day because it wasn't something that was on my mind. But at least where I lived and at least in New York, it seemed like it rained all day. So was it just a situation where it wasn't expected to rain?
The weather report kind of went from like it was fine in the morning to it's getting riskier throughout the day to they're definitely going to start in a rain delay. There's probably going to be clearing and then possibly more rain. And then you also had Steve Cohen come out and say, we think we can get this game started between 8 and 9, which I think swayed some people. That was what got me to put him back in cash, because originally I was just like, whatever, I'm not playing DeGrom. Because the big reason that like I liked DeGrom was the floor. And it was like, okay, if the game might not play, the floor is non-existent. So why am I paying 11.5 for this guy? So there was just like a lot of uncertainty, a changing forecast. And then, Steve Cohen coming out and saying, yeah, we'll be fine.
And by the way, also, because I did see Steve Cohen's tweet, and then afterwards he's like, I can't control the weather. Don't buy that for a second. I guarantee he can control the stock market. He can control all kinds of things. He can control the weather too. Good news for today is at least as of now, it doesn't look like there's any real significant weather concerns, at least nothing that's, making me totally alter my lineups right now. We do have the Phillies-Cubs game right now. Is about a 40% chance of rain. So that's one spot to keep an eye on, but there's nothing that's going to be, crazy impactful like Jacob deGrom in a game that's like a toss up. So I hate dealing with the weather in baseball. It's my least favorite thing about any kind of DFS sport, just because there's so much unpredictability to it. Number one, you have to tell whether it's going to rain or whether it's not going to rain. Not something that anybody's really capable of doing. The weathermen aren't even all that particularly good at it. And then number two, even if it rains, you still know if the game's going to get canceled or not. So it always ends up being, super annoying, those situations.
And if it doesn't rain, but it might rain, then sometimes the game also gets canceled.
Yeah, especially if it's, the Washington Nationals, like, hey, we're supposed to pitch some bad pitcher today. We want to try to get out of playing the game. So therefore, we're just going to cancel it even when there is no rain. So yeah, I hate dealing with the rain. It's definitely one of the more annoying parts of MLB DFS. But talking about today's game, we'll start with the main slate and first game, the Toronto Blue Jays at the Baltimore Orioles. It is Hyun-Jin Ryu pitching against Matt Harvey. Now, Matt Harvey has pitched marginally better as of late, although with that said, it's not like he could pitch any worse than he was pitching before, and still his numbers for the season, they're horrendous. He's a 7.34 ERA. It is his third consecutive season with an ERA north of 7, and then the underlying numbers too, 5.82 expected ERA, 4.83 FIP. He gives up so much hard contact. I think it's reasonable to expect that he's going to underperform his peripheral stats, but the question here becomes, Adam, Toronto Blue Jays elite offense, but there's also a good chance they'll end up being pretty popular. We've actually seen some slates recently where some of the stacks going up against Matt Harvey were not as popular as I would have expected, but today, not the case. 23% expected ownership for the Toronto Blue Jays today. So what are you doing with them in this great spot?
Yeah, it's one of those tough spots. Like we've had them a lot recently. You've had the Coors games, and then you've had the Wrigley Win games. Now you have Toronto against Matt Harvey. The ownership, and I think it goes back to what we've said in all those situations. It's obviously a very, very, very good spot for Toronto. Matt Harvey doesn't strike guys out. He gives up power to both sides of the plate, including righties, with an expected ISO over 200, 1.5 home runs per 9 overall this season, and all this power in the Toronto lineup. They're in a great spot. There's a very good chance that they're successful. But at the same time, there's 17 other offenses on the slate. Toronto right now has about a 20% chance of being the top stack, which is huge, but it still means 80% of the time they're not. And that, 20 plus 25, 20 to 25% of the field is going down with them. So basically the larger the tournament you're playing, the more top heavy the tournament is, the more willing you should be to just roll the dice and get away from Toronto, because it is still baseball. They can, there's a variety of ways for them not to be a team that you have to have, whether it's that Matt Harvey has one of his only good games of the year. The Blue Jays hit a million balls, 100 miles an hour right at outfielders and only score 2 or 3 runs. They score 6 runs, but a couple teams on the slate score 12. Like, there's still a lot of ways for it not to work out. So it just comes back again. So I think knowing the contest you're playing, knowing how top heavy it is, how large the field is, because they are very clearly the top stack tonight, but they're also getting the ownership.
Yeah, one thing I'll point out is about Blue Jays stacks. And by the way, we have had some slates against Matt Harvey recently where the teams going against him were not super popular, but this is the case tonight where the Blue Jays are going to be really popular. Lourdes Gurriel, one standalone option that does stand out to me, just from a standpoint of Gurriel currently projected for 7% ownership. Every other player in the lineup, actually, Bo Bichette, 18.5% projected ownership. But other than that, every other player here that we're expecting to start is picking up, pretty significant ownership. Vlad Guerrero, 27%, Semien, 27%, Springer, 23%, Teoscar Hernandez, 23%. Gurriel coming in at this low of ownership, that makes him, to me, a fairly high priority play in the context of this slate. I think that he's going way under-owned unless something changes with his ownership projection. He had a couple of games in a row where he didn't put up that many fantasy points, but he homered yesterday, so it's not really all that much of a concern to me. So if I had to pick out one guy who actually makes sense as a contrarian option, it's Lourdes Gurriel, just because I think he has actual upside, and there are no other contrarian plays here.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then also the thing I would point out too is, we're talking about Toronto being very, very popular. That doesn't mean if you're stacking a lower owned team, you can't mix in 1 or 2 of these Blue Jays and say, okay, like they'll probably get to Matt Harvey for at least, a couple runs. If I just happen to hit on a couple of home runs against him, but as a whole, the team doesn't go off, you're going to have so many teams that like just, using Vladimir Guerrero as an example, you're going to have a very high percentage of the lineups that have Vladimir Guerrero are going to have 2, 3, 4 other Toronto Blue Jays. So if Guerrero homers, has a big game, but the Blue Jays as a whole don't do that well, you'll still be in a pretty good spot, even though Guerrero is popular. So like, for example, yesterday I had my best tournament lineup ended up being a Yankee stack, but it had 2 of the guys from Philadelphia. So you can still get exposure to these guys as one-offs or, 2-mans with a lower owned stack as well. It's more so that I don't really want to be competing with, 2,000 other 5-man Blue Jay stacks.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, other than Gurriel, I imagine I'm going to be underweight to every single player in the Blue Jays lineup by the time the slate locks. It's just so much ownership going to these guys, and it is a 9-game slate. It's hard for me to get overweight to the field on everybody who isn't Gurriel. You basically need to have them 30+%. And every once in a while, there's individual hitters I like a lot that I'm going to have that much exposure to, but not on this particular slate with this team. There's other spots I like to go to. I'll have some Blue Jays stacks, but I'll be underweight to the field on them. That's going to be the stance that I'm taking. And then on the other side, pitching for the Toronto Blue Jays, Hyun-Jin Ryu has really struggled as of late. If you look at his numbers in July, he's 4.5 strikeouts per 9 innings, 4.5 walks. And then also his strikeout numbers were way down in June. His walk numbers were up. So I don't really know exactly what it is that's going on here with Ryu, because this started, by the way, even before the pitcher substance crackdowns. This is something that's been going on since the start of June, but he's not generating strikeouts. He's walking a lot more guys. Obviously, he was at one point in time a really good pitcher, but Ryu is a guy still fairly expensive. I think the Orioles make for, a fairly decent contrarian stack today for a couple of reasons. Number one, well, maybe not contrarian. They are picking up a little bit of ownership, but Ryu, the struggles. And then also the Blue Jays are so cheap today. We have him with a 16.5% chance on DraftKings of being the top value stack of the day. So if you're looking to save salaried offense and then pay up for pitching, I think the Orioles are the way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to go. We talk about it a lot. 1 through 5 on the Orioles really isn't bad, from Cedric Mullins through Anthony Santander. Then you get a cheap catcher option in most likely Pedro Severino. But Hayes, Mullins, Hayes, Mancini, Mountcastle, all very good, very powerful hitters. Santander also has some power, and he's only 2,400. So, like you were saying, a very good value stack. I am a little concerned about the aggregate ownership being like twice as high as the top stack percentage, but they do allow you to get some good pitching into your lineup. And, again, when you're talking about the middle of the order, you're really not sacrificing a whole lot in terms of power. These are all guys that have ISOs over 200.
Yeah, and then it'll also come down to, just what is your preferred lineup construction for today? Zach Wheeler, good pay up option at pitching. And then we've got other guys who, maybe not quite as strong pitching options, but Alex Wood, Luis Garcia, Chris Paddock. So if you do want to go with two stud pitchers, the Orioles are just much too cheap given how much Ryu has struggled as of late. That, and also it's a favorable hitting environment. So, those are the things that would lead me to them. Yeah, I guess maybe now that I'm thinking it through, just because there isn't, like a Jacob deGrom on this slate, that would probably limit my exposure to the Orioles a little bit. But still, I think it's a good enough spot to have them in the player pool. Next game on the slate, I'm going to see if we have pitchers here now. So the Miami Marlins taking on the Los Angeles Dodgers. At least when I looked before we started, there was no line for this game. There was no listed starting pitchers for either team. And I'm seeing, has that changed at all? DraftKings has David Hess listed as the starter for the Marlins, another former Oriole great starting pitcher. And then it looks like a bullpen game right now for the Dodgers. For now, I kind of think we just have to glance past this because I don't know who's on the mound exactly for either team. But have you seen anything different here?
I see something different, but as far as Andrew Heaney's on the Angels, right?
Yes.
Okay. One of our competitors has Andrew Heaney starting for the Dodgers tonight.
Cool. That would be crazy if he gets traded right before the game.
Yeah. So I was just, while you were talking, I was like Googling everything I could to be like, when the hell did this happen? But yeah. Okay. So no, I do see something different for the Dodgers, but I'm pretty sure it's not accurate.
Yeah, it looks like David Price is going to be pitching potentially in relief today. But yeah, still nothing confirmed. Also, another reason, guys, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel because later in the day we're going to have better information on what all the pitching matchups are for today. I think that Adam's probably doing a deeper dive today. I'll be doing live before lock tonight. So stick around, check that later, and then we'll have some more updated information. And then kind of a similar situation with the next game. The Milwaukee Brewers taking on the New York Mets. Brett Anderson is going to be pitching for the Brewers on the Mets side. This is going to be a doubleheader. The Mets, it looks like this is going to be a bullpen game for them as well. So I assume there's not going to be a starting pitcher in the mix, but still not totally known. Jacob deGrom is going to start the early game of the doubleheader. That's expected against Corbin Burns, I believe, in late game. Brett Anderson against the Mets bullpen, most likely. So with some of these games on double headers, one thing I think really makes a lot of sense to look at in terms of just a betting perspective, sometimes we see teams, especially with the tail end of back-to-back, will play really weak starting lineups. So I don't think Brett Anderson's a particularly great starting pitcher, but if we see a situation where all of a sudden the Mets are like, hey, no Lindor tonight, no Pete Alonso, the one thing I would look at here is maybe betting the under on the game. That's something that I like to do from time to time. I think that offers some value if the lineup comes out and a bunch of backups are playing guys we wouldn't normally see in the starting lineup. But other than that, Adam, for a game that's going to be 7 innings here, Brett Anderson, not really a great starting pitcher, but would you be willing to stack the Mets against Anderson, even though it's only a 7-inning game?
Yeah, I mean, probably not for a couple of reasons. One, if we assume we get a normal or semi-normal Mets lineup, you still have a lot of those lefty-lefty bats with Nimmo, Smith, McNeil, Conforto, all being guys that you would want to go to typically in a Mets stack. And then the fact that it's a 7-inning game lowers the ceiling quite a bit. And then also, like you were saying, there's a decent chance that you don't get a very good lineup either. So if Pete Alonso's in the lineup, I like Alonso here. But outside of that, I'm not that interested in the Mets, even though I don't think Anderson's very good.
Yeah, and then on the Brewers side, kind of hard to know. We don't know who's going to be pitching for the Mets. It looks like it's going to be a bullpen game with Robert Stock starting. But, it's kind of similar for me on the Brewers side. Right now, we only have a 0.8% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate. When it's only a 7-inning game, it's just really hard to find a whole lot of upside in those kind of games. So in general, we're going to be expecting everybody to get about one less plate appearance than they normally would. That's something that's going to really limit the upside. And then, on top of that, we don't even know who's going to be starting for the Mets. So as of now, assuming it's a bullpen game, the Brewers also, per our numbers, with only a 0.8% chance of being a top stack. It's just not a spot I'd be looking to get to.
Yep, same here.
All right. So moving on now, and rest of the games, at least for the main slate, we know the starting pitchers now. So that is a nice little way that we could proceed forward. But this is going to be an actual pretty important pitching matchup. The Philadelphia Phillies against the Chicago Cubs. Zach Wheeler on the mound for the Phillies. Wheeler has been incredible this year. He's always been a quality starting pitcher, but this is the first season that we're really seeing some significant fantasy upside for him because he's always had great stuff, but the strikeouts had never really been there for him in a significant way. This year, totally different. 31.3% K rate. That is way up from his career norm. Last year, even though he was successful, he only had 18.4% K rate last year. That really limited his fantasy upside. Now that he's generating all these swing and misses, it's pretty hard to say anything other than that he is the best starting pitching option on this slate tonight. It's not the best slate for starting pitching options. If you look at our top pitchers tool, which, by the way, if you go to Awesemo.com, our top pitchers tool is free today. That'll include the ownership projection for each individual pitcher, and then also their chances of being a top scoring pitcher on the slate. Zach Wheeler, right now, we have him with a 42% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we have him with a 16% chance to be the top overall scoring pitcher. So by far, he's just in a tier of his own. The question then just kind of becomes, because, cash game's no-brainer Wheeler. But for GPPs, do you want to have him in more or less than half the lineups the field has him in?
Yeah, I mean, I still think he looks really good just because, like you were saying, it's not a great pitching slate. And it's also different than, for example, yesterday, I thought there was at least a case to be made, like to get away from the ground, because you just had a number of guys in that 7 to 8K range that had pretty high ceilings. On this slate, it's different because when you look at the pitchers that are talented, they're all priced up. Like Sean Manaea is 9,900 against Houston. Yusei Kikuchi is 9,300 against the Yankees, which is just absurd. Alex Wood, 8,500. Like Luis Garcia, 9,600. You don't have that big gap where you're like, okay, I can just make like a markedly different lineup by avoiding the very popular expensive pitcher. So I'm inclined to just go to Wheeler here. I talked about it a lot with DeGrom yesterday too. I don't care quite as much about pitcher ownership when it's a good pitcher or like clearly the best pitcher on the slate, because you still have so many other roster spots to work with that he isn't correlated with. Whereas when you talk about stacks, you're using half of your lineup, stacked in one team. So it's really hard to be different than those other stacks, other teams that are stacking the same team. So right now I'd lean toward still just going to Wheeler here. The weather looks a lot better for pitching in Chicago than it has been. There are some rain concerns, but assuming those work out, the wind's blowing in. It's the game's got a 7.5 total, I believe. So compared to 10 or 11 over the last couple of days. So I think it looks like a good spot to get to Wheeler. Like you said, he's been very, very good this year. There are plenty of strikeouts in this Cubs lineup. So I don't really have any negative things to say about Wheeler.
Yeah, and the other thing about the rain too, I brought it up on the beginning of the show because also we're talking about the DeGrom situation from yesterday, and we do have Bubba Wallace guy in the YouTube chat said rain all day in Chicago. There's a chance of rain, but there's a couple of things here. Number one, most of the rain is coming later in the night, at least per the current forecast. So, at the start of the game, we only have a 20% chance of rain. Then by the time it's the later innings, it's a 40% chance of rain. So if the game starts in a delay, that would be cause for concern for me. But for right now, it looks like, based on the hourly weather report, shouldn't be an issue at the start of the game. And then even if it does pop up later in the game, it wouldn't impact the starting pitching at that point. We'd probably already get Zach Wheeler through 6 or 7 innings and would basically pitch his, normal amount of run, considering it's not supposed to start really raining there until 9 p.m. Chicago time. So definitely something to keep an eye on. For now, I'm not massively concerned, but also something that we're going to be probably addressing more later on in Live Before Lock when I do that. So once again, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll have more information on the weather later on in the day. And then starting for the Cubs, Alec Mills is going to be on the mound. He's somebody who I'm almost positive I haven't rostered at all this year. Really works deep into games. Also not a guy with all that much strikeout upside, only an 18.6% K rate. So I don't think he's somebody we really want to consider. But the question becomes here is, even if Mills isn't all that good, does the wind blowing in become any bit of an issue for the Phillies offense?
Yeah, I think it's an issue for the Phillies offense. Like, I don't want to get too bogged down in the hitting conditions, but we know the difference that it makes in Wrigley. It's typically reflected in the total. You had this Phillies team with, I think, a 5.5 or a 6 implied run total yesterday. Now they're at 3.8. And Mills also isn't a bad pitcher. He's just not stretched out, for DFS purposes. He doesn't give up a ton of power. So far this year, not the biggest sample, but a 125 ISO to righties, 141 to lefties. If you go back to last season, 111 expected ISO to righties, 212 to lefties is pretty nice if you want to look like Bryce Harper. But yeah, I don't think the hitting conditions are great. I don't think Mills is a bad pitcher. I think there's some other spots that look a little bit better to me.
Yeah, and then also with Alec Mills, in terms of his viability as a pitching option, he went 5 2/3 innings last start. That was the deepest he's worked into a game all season. So, it's really hard to get that much upside out of a pitcher when they're only going that deep into games. He's usually somewhere in the neighborhood of, like 70 to 75 pitches. So Mills, he's a guy maybe a little more stretched out than he was early in the year, but still really works all that deep into games. So not somebody that I have interest in. Although I don't really want to get to the Phillies at a high rate just because of some of the wind there. And then also, like you said, Mills is by no means a bad pitcher either.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like you can read a little bit at least into the fact he threw 92 pitches last game. Like maybe they're going to start treating him like a starter. But then you still run into the issue of he's 7,400 and he's not a very good strikeout guy. So, if you're playing 150 tournament lineups, maybe I can see it because of the weather. But and the fact that he threw 92 pitches last game, maybe that's what they're going to keep doing. But there is still just a very good chance I think that he just gives you like a mediocre performance.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Just the spot I don't have a ton of interest in on either side. The next game over here is a pretty interesting one. It is the Oakland A's going up against the Houston Astros. So Sean Manaea has pitched very well this year. The pitching is generally fairly weak on this slate, but it's Manaea in Houston, so none of that is great. 3.13 ERA, 3.76 ERA for Manaea. Also, the strikeout numbers way up this year from last year, 25.1% K rate. So Manaea against the Houston Astros offense, not an ideal spot, but relative to some of the other pitching options, is Manaea somebody who you might like to get to in tournaments?
I don't really like the spot for him. If the ownership's low, which right now we have him projected for 2% ownership, I think then he starts to make some sense. But he's still more expensive than I'd really like. The Astros we know are just a dangerous, a good offense. But the other thing that concerns me here is that you're going to get most likely a right-handed heavy lineup where the only lefties are Brantley, Alvarez, and Tucker. Manaea's strikeouts have been weighted very, very heavily towards left-handed bats. He has struck out 34.5% of lefties this year, only 22% of righties. So that's a little bit concerning in addition to the fact, that Houston's really, really good. So I think you can make the argument in larger field tournaments, just, the same argument that we've made for Dylan Cease recently, that we've made for Kevin Gausman a week or two ago in a tough matchup, where it's just like, okay, well, he's good. And basically, like if Zach Wheeler were to fail, Manaea is one of the more talented pitchers on the slate. But I don't really love the price point. I don't like the matchup. So I wouldn't expect to be getting to that much Manaea.
Yeah, for sure in cash games, no reason to consider Manaea. The thing that stands out to me, so if you look at our top pitchers tool, 2.4% projected ownership, 12% chance to be a top 2 pitcher on the slate. So with that in mind, at the very least, I think it makes sense to be overweight to the field. But I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical for you right now. Let's say the weather gets worse in Chicago, and all of a sudden it looks like that Philly-Chicago game isn't playing. In that sort of situation, does that make you want to get to Manaea? I mean, obviously it would make you get to Manaea more, but how strongly would you consider in a situation where we no longer have Wheeler as an option?
I think a lot would still depend on the ownership there, specifically in how the ownership shapes up between him and Luis Garcia on the other side of this game, because I do prefer Luis Garcia between the two. But if like you see, because like right now you have 22% ownership going to Garcia, 2% to Manaea. If you see something where like Garcia ends up moving to, let's say, 45% and Manaea just kind of goes to like 7%, then you're getting this really, really big gap. And I think that Manaea makes a lot of sense. If you see it where like a lot of the ownership just goes to Manaea and maybe Garcia goes to 30 and Manaea goes to 20, then I'd be even more inclined to go to Garcia. So it really would depend on like how the ownership shifts and specifically how it shifts relative to Luis Garcia.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you that of the two pitchers in the slate, Luis Garcia is the better fantasy option. Garcia has been, under the radar, really strong pitcher this year. 3.14 ERA, 3.25 expected ERA. The strikeout stuff has been there. So he has a K rate of 27.4%. That's all really nice. So the Oakland A's offense, there is a lot of power there, but there is also the potential for strikeouts. So Luis Garcia, maybe a little bit of variance because the A's do have a good offense with power, but because of the strikeout potential here and the other options on the slate, Luis Garcia is a fairly high priority pitching option for me.
Yeah, agreed. 24.5% strikeout percentage against lefties, a little bit over 30% against righties. The A's lineup, the hitters that you're most scared of are typically right-handed. Matt Olson, of course, being the exception from the left side. But Matt Chapman, Ramon Laureano, Sean Murphy, all powerful hitters from the right side that Garcia should have the advantage against and pick up some strikeouts there. And only a 4 implied run total for Oakland. So I do like Garcia here. Again, a pretty weak pitching slate. I typically have trouble like trusting guys at 9,600 that have kind of come out of nowhere and don't have a long track record of being really good. But Garcia, has been good this year. There's a lack of options on this slate. I think the matchup's okay. So I do like Luis Garcia.
All right, and guys, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you guys have not checked out PrizePicks, prop-based daily fantasy sports games, and you make cards. And what's really nice about PrizePicks is I'm on the site right now. you could parlay together all different kinds of sports. So CSGO, what is it? I'm not entirely sure, but I'm sure that Alex plays DFS for CSGO fairly regularly. So if you wanted to, you could go on CSGO and you could parlay Mir to have over 40 and a half kills today with whoever your favorite baseball players are, whoever your favorite baseball props are. So that's something that I definitely recommend going check out. Also, as for some of my favorite players over today at PrizePicks, anybody who's on the Toronto Blue Jays going up against Matt Harvey, those are the guys I'm looking at. We've got Kevin Biggio here, 1.5 hits plus walks, over under, something there. Anybody on the Blue Jays going up against Matt Harvey? Also, I think it makes sense to parlay some of these guys together. It's like you can get George Springer over 9 fantasy points. Parlay that with Kevin Biggio for over 1.5 hits walks. I think those are correlations that make sense over PrizePicks. Use the promo code Awesemo and get a $100 bonus match on your first deposit. So go ahead on over to PrizePicks, promo code Awesemo, and check that out. All right, the next game that we have here on the slate, the Colorado Rockies going up against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Humberto Castellanos on the mound for Arizona. For Colorado, Antonio Senzatella on the mound. So just starting with this, Senzatella is by no means a good starting pitcher, but I don't think he's quite as bad as some of his numbers suggest, just because he has to make so many of his starts at Coors Field. So there are times where Senzatella goes on the road where there isn't necessarily upside in him, except he's generally cheap, which is, something else that we have for today's slate. Only 6,600 on DraftKings, also only picking up 4% ownership. Honestly, where we're kind of lacking pitching options and there aren't that many good value guys to like as an SP2, I actually have a moderate amount of interest in Antonio Senzatella at such a cheap price tag going up again in a favorable matchup against Arizona. Is that crazy, Adam?
I mean, I get it. I still obviously have concerns about the strikeout stuff, the fact that he's not very good. I agree he's probably not as bad as his numbers because he pitches in Coors, but still, have concerns about the strikeout stuff. Don't really know how necessary it'll be to pay down there, but he does have a 10.5% top 2 pitcher percentage, only 4% ownership. So I get it. I'm hoping to not get there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it. I would hope to not play Senzatella too, but I made my initial build and he ended up in about 10% of my lineups, which is, about double the exposure of the field. And then, you kind of look at the other options on DraftKings and look at the top pitchers tool. And, we have Senzatella at 6,600 with a 10.7% chance to be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. And then you start to say like, hey, if I'm looking to save salary with somebody, who else am I going to below 7,000? The options are Senzatella, Oviedo, Humberto Castellanos on the other side of the game, and Matt Harvey. At least of those options, I feel like in any spot where I'm paying up for offense, like let's say that you're making a 5-man Blue Jays stack, you really need to save salary somewhere. I think Senzatella kind of makes sense in that situation. Also, you brought up 19.9% chance to be a top 2 value pitcher per our top stacks per our top pitchers tool. So I don't mind Senzatella as an SP2. Not that he's going to be a highly desirable play for me, but I have him in 10% of my lineups right now. So I felt need to bring that up because it is 2x the field. But are you interested in stacking against him with the Diamondbacks?
Not really. Right now, we have a lot of ownership going to Arizona. I think it's an okay spot for them. They come in the middle of the pack in terms of top stack percentage at 5%. But the thing is that they grade out as one of the best value stacks, and that typically just drives up their ownership. Looking at this lineup, Eduardo Escobar, or projected lineup, Eduardo Escobar is 4,400 on DraftKings. No other hitter in their projected lineup is more expensive than 3,300. That's Josh Rojas leading off. So you get a very, very cheap stack. It'll make it so you can go Garcia plus Wheeler, which I would guess a lot of people do if they stack the Diamondbacks. So you just get even more overlap there. So I'm more interested, I think, in using these guys as value one-offs maybe. Rojas, Pavin Smith, if he's hitting second, for example. David Peralta, 2,800 is okay. But I don't really like the full stack just because I think it's going to push you into a lot of just really overlap lineups with other Arizona stacks.
Yeah, for me, if I'm saving money at offense with a really cheap stack, that's also one of the reasons that my preference is to go to Baltimore instead of Arizona. So right now we actually have Baltimore with slightly better chance of being a top value stack on the slate compared to Arizona. And we have Baltimore with about half the ownership of Arizona. And then also just the fact that we have Arizona with a 5% chance of being a top stack and a 13.3% ownership share. Right now, we have Arizona projected to be the second most popular offense on the slate behind the Toronto Blue Jays. So like I said, I don't think Senzatella is any good per se, but I think he offers some decent leverage off of a Diamondbacks team that's a lot chalkier than it probably should be. And then also something about Senzatella is even if though he isn't a particularly good pitcher, he does generate a lot of ground balls, and that could be a little hard to generate upside against him. So pitcher 53% ground ball rate. If I had to pick one side of this game to roster, I lean towards the Senzatella side over the Arizona stack.
Yeah, I think everything you said makes sense. Yeah, no disagreements there. Like neither one of us are like advocating for Antonio Senzatella, but I agree with all the points you made.
Yeah, I just think he's worth some stabs in GPP. If you're playing multiple lineups. If you're playing, 3 or 10 lineups, no reason to consider Senzatella, but max entering, I'll have a small amount of exposure to him. On the other side of the game, Humberto Castellanos on the mound for Diamondbacks. For all intents and purposes, this is going to be a bullpen game. Castellanos has pretty good numbers for the year, but he's only pitched 11 innings and 7 outings so far. So I don't think he's going to work all that deep into the game. He did make 5 AAA starts, but in those 5 starts, he only pitched a total of 19 innings. So Castellanos, do you see anything differently with him, or is there any reason that maybe you think he might work deeper into the game?
No, I'm expecting it to basically be a bullpen game here. The last time Castellanos pitched was July 3rd. He threw 27 pitches in an inning in the third against the Giants. Prior to that, he pitched on June 30th, threw 34 pitches in 2 innings against the Cardinals. I'm expecting more of the same here against the Rockies.
Yeah, and then as for the Rockies as a stack, I'm kind of surprised to see them picking up this much ownership and looking good in the top stack. So just because the Rockies have such a poor offense on the road, and then especially against right-handed pitching, if we were to pull the WRC plus numbers for the last 5 years, the Rockies come out near the bottom of the league basically every single year over that time frame. So the Rockies, even though they have pretty high percentage chance of being a top stack, I don't buy it personally. This is an offense I really don't like to stack more often than not. And then also that's going to be a bullpen game. I think that this is a spot where it's just not a favorable spot for the Rockies. So are you like me where maybe you disagree with the top stacks tool a little bit, or do you think there is reason to think they have a decent chance of going off here?
Yeah, I disagree with the top stacks tool here. The Rockies just aren't very good, and bullpen games in general aren't that appealing. I'm also thinking maybe we have some sort of issue with our early top stack run because it didn't dawn on me earlier. The Phillies have the second highest top stack percentage with their 3.8 implied run total. So that's pretty weird to me too, I think. So maybe just kind of some wonky stuff going on in that first run.
Yeah, probably send a message to get that updated afterwards. But yeah, the Rockies, I mean, right now with the third highest odds being a top stack, that is something that I don't agree with. There are slates where the Rockies are playing in Coors Field where they don't have the third best odds of being the top stack. So yeah, the Diamondbacks bullpen, even if it isn't the most daunting bullpen in the league, it's still going to set up, fairly tough relative to most just average starting pitchers going out. And, I think the evidence for that is you look at Humberto Castellanos' numbers for the season, even if he's only going to pitch an inning or two, he has a 3.09 ERA, 3.25 expected ERA. So, he's still a guy who, at least for that 1 or 2 innings he's going to be out there, he's a better pitcher than the majority of starting pitchers. So I don't really like this spot all that much for the Rockies. And as of now, it's a team I'm not looking to stack, especially if they're going to be picking up that much ownership. Next game we have here, it is the St. Louis Cardinals against the San Francisco Giants. Johan Oviedo on the mound for St. Louis, and then Alex Wood on the mound for San Francisco. Oviedo, but just off the top of my head, I don't think the Cardinals have won a single game that he started this year. It seems like every time he goes out, he pitches poorly. The bullpen does poorly behind him. So it's just narrative based, but I just can't remember a game that they've won that he started. But on the other side of the mound, Alex Wood is a fairly high priority pitching option for me today just because of a lack of other plays on the slate. It's not the best matchup in the world against the St. Louis Cardinals, but still, with that said, we look at some of the other options on the slate and they're not all that appealing. And Alex Wood's been decent enough this year, 3.89 ERA, 4.0 expected ERA to strikeout numbers this year. Up for Alex Wood compared to recent years, 25.5% K rate. So the last few years, he's been at 21.2%, 19.6, 23.1. So Alex Wood with the strikeout rate on the rise here, is he somebody who you're going to be prioritizing?
Yeah, I really like Alex Wood here. You have him pitching in San Francisco, which we know is favorable. And then you're going to get this like entirely right-handed lineup from the Cardinals, which is always scary when you're talking about a left-handed pitcher. But Wood has a strikeout percentage against righties this year of 27.5% compared to 19.5% against lefties. So that makes me feel a little bit better as well that you're seeing those really, really good strikeout numbers against righties. And we know the Cardinals will give you some strikeouts, even though they have some powerful bats. The park should help to mitigate the power upside as well. So I do really like Alex Wood. Right now, he's second in the top top pitchers tool, and getting 36% ownership. I think all that makes sense to me. I really like Wood here as one of the top pitchers on the slate.
Yeah, and on the other side, any interest in going to the Cardinals maybe as a contrarian stack just in case that there's a ton of ownership that ends up coming in on Alex Wood?
I can see it. Just again, the leverage against the ownership because you do just have powerful bats here with Arenado, Goldschmidt, Carlson, Edman. These guys all can hit. Tyler O'Neill may or may not be in the lineup after being a late scratch yesterday with some sort of allergic reaction. But yeah, I can see getting just looking to stack a relatively powerful team against a 36% owned pitcher. But if I had to choose one side of this, I'm going Alex Wood.
All right, and then Johan Oviedo starting on the other side of the game for the St. Louis Cardinals. And Oviedo this year, pretty unimpressive numbers. The ERA is no good. The underlying numbers are no good. 5.14 ERA, 5.56 expected ERA, 5.29 FIP. So negative wins above replacement. Guy who's been below replacement level this year. Not striking guys out, walking a lot of guys. There is nothing really to like here about Oviedo. And then even looking at some of his minor league numbers when we recently have data, those aren't any good either. This year, he made 2 starts in minor leagues, 9 ERA, 4.61 FIP. There was no 2020 minor league numbers, although Oviedo pitched in the major leagues last year. He was terrible there, 5.47 ERA, 7.05 expected ERA. 2019, the last year we have full numbers on him in the minor leagues, he had a 5.65 ERA and a 4.13 FIP. So there is nothing here to me that suggests that Oviedo is any good as a pitcher. The San Francisco Giants, our team, they've had a surprisingly good offense this year. They have fallen off a little bit recently. Not that I think anybody expected them to, continue staying in first in the division with the Padres and the Dodgers, but they're starting to slide in the standings a little bit, but still offense better than expected. I don't think Oviedo is any good at all. So considering this is a stack that's not expected to have all that much ownership right now, 4.9%, I like the Giants a decent amount in this spot.
Yeah, I do too. It's really unusual to see an implied run total this high for San Francisco in San Francisco. And, going back to the start of the 2019 season, when you look at the hitters in this lineup against right-handed pitching, I know it's a team that you and I both, I don't think completely believe in being like a really good offense. But also, Mike Yastrzemski has a 133 WRC plus, Lamont Wade 130, Alex Dickerson 122, Posey, if he happens to be back in the lineups, at 118, Donovan Solano 109. Wilmer Flores, if he's in the lineup, is at 109. Brandon Crawford, 107. Like, these guys have been above average hitters going back to the 2019 season against right-handed pitching. And Oviedo, like you said, doesn't miss bats. He hasn't done a very good job of limiting power. He's allowed a 211 expected ISO to righties, 188 to lefties. I think it sets up as a pretty good spot for the Giants. And as long as the ownership's relatively low, I'll be interested in going there.
Yeah, and this is also going to be, so I'm going to give out a home run pick for the night right now. That is going to be Wilmer Flores, only at 4,200 on DraftKings, picking up 7% ownership. I think that he's somebody who it makes some sense to get to. I know that traditionally Wilmer Flores is somebody who we usually like to target more against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching, but even so, I think that Wilmer Flores, given where he's hitting in the order, favorable matchup. Also, it is a little bit better for power at San Francisco now than used to be in other years, just because the walls have been moved in. So Wilmer Flores kind of in a regular pick, except something else that's weird about Wilmer Flores. I don't know how much you've looked at his numbers this year, but Flores is always a guy who's crushed left-handed pitching, but 122 WRC plus against righties this year. So Wilmer Flores, I like him as an individual GPP play.
Yeah, I like it too. He's at 109 going back to the start of the 2019 season. Actually, in the Giants projected lineup that I have up, which is Wade, Yastrzemski, Posey, Dickerson, Crawford, Flores, Solano, Duggar. Every single hitter in that lineup has a WRC plus of at least 101 against right-handed pitching since the start of the 2019 season.
Yeah, I dig it. And then I still think the Giants are a team, like, I can't remember many spots the Giants have been chalk this year. I still think that people look at the Giants and just go, oh, it's the Giants. But it's been a good offense this year. I don't think Oviedo is any good. So as of right now, if I was finalizing my lineups and had to submit them this second, I actually think the Giants would be the offense I would have the most exposure to. So we'll see later in the day when some of the ownership projections come in. But as of right now, I really like that spot for San Francisco. Next game on the slate here, Patrick Corbin going up against Chris Paddock. It is the Washington Nationals against the San Diego Padres. Patrick Corbin has sparked some upside at times this season, but in general, he looks like a pitcher who's pretty well past it on a massive contract for Washington. And it looks like one of the worst ones in baseball. 5.56 ERA this year, 5.38 expected ERA. The velocities actually come up a little bit, but still the numbers are so poor for him. The strikeouts also career low, 18.6% strikeout rate. I tend to think that Patrick Corbin is just finished here, but what do you make of him as a pitcher?
Yeah, same thoughts here, especially struggling with righties this year, which, isn't really surprising, but he's been good still against left-handed bats. But he's only struck out 16.2% of right-handed hitters. He's allowed a 228 expected ISO, 372 expected WOBA. He's just not having success against these guys like he used to. And then now you're going up against this Padres team that just has right-handed power everywhere. Tommy Pham, Tatis, Machado, Myers, these guys all can do a lot of damage. So I think it sets up as a pretty good spot for the right-handed power in the Padres lineup. Really like those guys. Obviously Tatis and Machado are expensive, but based on what Corbin's done this year, I think the Padres look pretty good.
Yeah, the field is getting there in terms of ownership. 8% projected ownership for San Diego right now, which maybe a little bit high, but we've seen with Patrick Corbin a lot this year. I think people have been a little bit hesitant to stack against him. Maybe that's starting to turn a little bit, but still, the Padres, one of the best offenses in baseball. Patrick Corbin, the price tag to me looks way too high on DraftKings at $8,000. On FanDuel, Corbin also priced at $8,000. So no reason to consider him at all, even though we're kind of limited on pitching options. Doesn't matter to me. Patrick Corbin has not been good this year, and the price tag is incorrect. On the other side of the game, Chris Paddock, somebody else who was once a former top pitching prospect and looked like he was destined to be a Cy Young winner at some point in his career. And his numbers this year, not quite as bad as last year, except still not great looking for Patrick Corbin. 4.56 expected ERA, 4.09 expected ERA, 4.56 actual ERA. Strikeouts 24.4%. So, we look at Chris Paddock. I guess he's in play just because of the limited other options. But if he's going to be as popular as it looks like he's going to be, I kind of prefer the Washington Nationals side just because they have such a good offense to try to get some upside here. Because right now, Chris Paddock projected to be nearly 30% owned. That's just too high for me in this matchup.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like Paddock here just because the Nats are missing Schwarber. I mean, this offense is, I think the current version of this offense isn't really that good. Like Trey Turner, Juan Soto, Josh Bell are good. You can say what you want about Castro, but Alcides Escobar is their current leadoff hitter normally. Gerardo Parra is back on this team, which that's someone that doesn't hit very well. Victor Robles will give you strikeouts. Yan Gomes will give you strikeouts. You have the pitcher spot. I think it's kind of a good spot for Paddock. And the walk numbers are still good at around 5.5%. Strikeout percentage 24.5% is fine. The price tag I think is reasonable. I think he's just to me he's similar to Alex Wood. You're getting similar ownership between the two. I think they project similarly, have similar chances of success. So I do like Paddock here.
So then I'll ask you for cash games. FanDuel, easy enough. I think we're both going Zach Wheeler. DraftKings, we have to roster two. Zach Wheeler is going to take one of the cash game slots. Who would be your second choice for a cash game pitcher on DraftKings?
Most likely Alex Wood.
Okay, yeah, that's how I feel too. Matchup against St. Louis, probably about similar to the matchup against Washington without Schwarber. But I have a little more confidence in Wood than Paddock. Wood's had more success this year. Maybe a little bit more strikeout upside in Paddock, but Alex Wood, to me, at least he feels like the safer pitcher. And then he's also projected for more ownership. So all else being equal, if you're not sure where to go in cash games, I always think it makes sense to use the ownership as a tiebreaker spot. And Alex Wood looks like he's going to be quite a bit more popular than Paddock today. So, yeah, I have a hard time getting behind Paddock in this matchup. So I think I'm ultimately going to be going underweights to the field on him. And I think I'm also leaning towards getting some leverage against him with Washington stacks. But Adam, you're a little bit higher on Paddock than me. Would you be willing to stack Washington against him?
Kind of feel similarly on Washington as I do the Cardinals. I don't really like the spot. I like the opposing pitcher, but on a slate like this where you do kind of have at least some question marks about pretty much every pitcher outside of Zach Wheeler, I think whatever pitchers end up being popular, there's at least some argument to stack against them in larger field tournaments. So I don't really like the Nats that much. I would rather, if I could only stack one team, I'd rather go to the Cardinals than the Nats. Just because I think they have a little bit more power upside. You don't have to use guys like Alcides Escobar. But, I think the overall theory, the overall concept is the same where, it's still baseball. The Nats, you can think Paddock has the advantage in this matchup, and the Nats are still going to have success a relatively high percentage of the time. And you can, knock a quarter of the field out if they do.
All right. Now, final game on the slate. And then, guys, after we're done talking about this, don't go anywhere because Ab and I, after wrapping up the main slate, we're going to do a little live before lock for the early slate, which is going to be right after this. Slate locks right around noon Eastern time. So last game here, though, interesting pitching option, Domingo Germán against the newly minted all-star Yusei Kikuchi. So Domingo Germán does have a favorable matchup against the Seattle Mariners. On the other side, Yusei Kikuchi, He has had a lot of success this year, but more than slightly more difficult matchup against the New York Yankees. So which of these pitchers, if either, do you have interest in for tournaments?
I think I have more interest in Herman just because of the matchup and the price point. We've talked about a lot of pitchers that we have interest in, like 8,500 plus, Wood, Paddock, Garcia, Wheeler. We haven't talked about anybody sub 8K that we actually have interest in. So I think that it's kind of just like a dead range there. And a pitcher like Herman, who the strikeout numbers haven't been great this year. He's someone that's had strikeout success in the past, but only around 21% this year. But he does get strikeout upside going up against this Mariners team that will just give you some strikeouts. He's done an okay job limiting power to lefties, 176 expected ISO, 227 to righties. It's certainly not a safe matchup. He's not a pitcher that I trust. But I think, for example, based on the stuff, I think there's a better chance that you get like a random big strikeout game from Domingo Herman here than from like Senzatella.
All right. And then in terms of the offenses, anybody you're looking to stack here? To me, I do have a little bit of interest in the Mariners. I don't really in the Yankees just because I think that Kikuchi's a pretty solid starting pitcher. You look at his numbers this year, he's had success, 3.18 ERA, 4.09 expected ERA. And the Yankees offense has been so disappointing that I don't really see them as a team I want to get to all that much. But Herman has been inconsistent enough this year that I always think that there's some upside to targeting against him, especially with the Seattle Mariners. Right now, if we look at their offense, only projected for 3% ownership. Not that I would go crazy with them, but about being even with the field, I think would be reasonable enough for maybe doing with a 6.4% chance of being a top value stack. So any interest in the Mariners or the Yankees as a stack?
Yeah, so I agree with you on the Mariners that they're low owned, and Domingo Herman is an inconsistent pitcher that gives up some power. So you can certainly go to Seattle as a low owned stack. I disagree a bit on the Yankees. I agree completely that Kikuchi's a good pitcher. He's not someone that I think there's a really high chance of success against. But the current ownership numbers on the Yankees are pretty insane when you consider how much power they have in this lineup. Like individually going down the list, Judge at 3.6%, Sanchez and Voit at 2.7, LeMahieu at 2.3, Torres, if he's in the lineup, at 1.8, Stanton at 1.7. These are like all guys with ISOs over 200 against left-handed pitching over the last 3 years. And so I just think on a slate like this where we don't like a lot of the pitching, but we haven't really loved a lot of offenses either. And the Yankees, we know, give you the potential to just, go absolutely nuts any given night because they just have so much power. If Kikuchi's not on top of his game, they can really take advantage. If, Kikuchi only goes for whatever reason, 5 innings or something like that, they can get to guys in the bullpen. There's just so much power in this lineup that as long as they're low owned, I like going to them in tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable enough. I mean, 2% projected ownership is, really low for the Yankees. It's not my favorite spot against Kikuchi, but yeah, I think it's reasonable to say that if they're 2% owned, making 4 or 5% Yankee stacks is not the worst in the world for upside. By the way, guys, if you want to access some of the tools that Adam and I are talking about, which I use a ton in my process to build lineups, I know Adam uses them also. Go use the promo code MLB Live Before Lock when you're making your first time signing up for an Awesemo Plus Platinum package. So MLB Live Before Lock, that is all capital letters, and that'll be 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Or then also, if you want to get an MLB weekly package, so not the Awesemo Plus for everything, you get an MLB weekly package for $15.95. So any closing thoughts that you have for the main slate, or you want to move on to the early slate?
I think the main slate's just weird in that outside of the Blue Jays against Harvey, I don't really think there's like any offenses I love. There's not really any pitching I love outside of like Zach Wheeler. So I think it just comes down to ownership probably will end up playing a bigger role for me because you're not going to get a lot of big differences in terms of chances of success or projection, I don't think. So yeah, I think it's just a spot where you'll probably end up, or at least I will end up being uncomfortable with a lot of things that I end up playing. But, trusting the ownership, the top stack tool, top pitchers tool, chances of success versus ownership, I think is, kind of how you win slates like this.
All right. So now getting into the early slate. So guys, that is the main slate. Also, we're going to be cutting up some of these as podcasts. So if you're just tuning in now and you wanted to listen to us talk about the main slate, now we're talking about the early slate, go subscribe to the Awesemo Podcast Network. And that's where we're going to have all the strategy shows. They will be up there, but now for the Live Before Lock for the early slate, I've been looking, and it looks like JC Mejia has been confirmed as the starting pitcher for the Indians in the Indians-Rays game. So the first game we're talking about here, Cleveland Indians against the Tampa Bay Rays. Michael Wacha on the mound for Tampa Bay. JC Mejia on the mound for Cleveland. I'm also just looking up really quick to see if there has been a betting line added for this game. And yes, so we have the Rays are a minus 165 favorite, fairly low total here, over under 7 runs to be expected because it's only a 7-inning game. This is the front end of a doubleheader. So game on DraftKings, but is not on FanDuel. So here's an interesting way to look at this game, Adam. With it only being a 5-game slate, we kind of have to consider the offense a little bit more in these 7-inning games than we would otherwise. But how high of a priority would either of these offenses be, given that it's a doubleheader? So 7 innings, but also lack of offenses to choose from.
Yeah, so I mean, they still have the 2 lowest top stack percentages on the slate, but 4.9% for Tampa, 4% for Cleveland. That's a bit higher than you normally get on full slates when you have these doubleheader games. So I think that, and they're not getting a lot of ownership either. I do think Tampa Bay is particularly interesting here. A 3.9 implied run total for a 7-inning game is relatively high. And looking at JC Mejia's numbers against lefties this year, only an 18.8% strikeout percentage, a 231 expected ISO allowed, 406 expected WOBA. This is a really tough lineup in terms of the way that it's set up. You have only one right-handed bat in the lineup, Mike Zunino hitting 8th. You have Vidal Brujan called up, making his major league debut, number 36 overall prospect in baseball, hitting 5th for 2K. Just a lot of left-handed power overall in this lineup. So, of course, you have to downgrade them for the fact that it's a 7-inning game. But I do think that there is some appeal here. They could just get to Mejia early and really rack up some big innings.
By the way, also, we just got a ownership update for the never mind. You had it. I was looking at the old ones. You had the most recent one. So never mind that. But anyway, just because I answered this question to somebody in the YouTube chat and I was looking at the not updated numbers, and just to have it so it's clear, the Tampa Bay Rays currently 3.9% projected ownership as a team. The Cleveland Indians 4.3% projected ownership as a team in terms of stacks here. So with that information in mind and looking at some of the top stacks tool, I don't think either of these teams are going to be massively high priority for me. Like you said, the 2 lowest odds of being a top stack on the slate. As for JC Mejia as a pitcher, if I had to roster one of the pitchers in this game, I think Mejia is a better option than Michael Wacha, but that's not saying much. Both pitchers have not found all that much success this year. Mejia this year, 6.18 ERA, 4.53 expected ERA. The strikeout numbers, 22.1%. So not terrible, but not great either. I don't think there's a whole lot that I like in this game, either from the offenses or the pitchers.
Yeah, I think mostly it'll just be like one-offs for me because, or like mini stacks. Because again, you just lose that upside not having a full game here. But I do like the power upside for these Rays bats. So I think just grabbing Brandon Lau, understanding you're probably losing an at bat, but Brandon Lau, especially hitting leadoff, he might not lose an at bat. Brujan at 2K, I think is a good value. On the other side, Jose Ramirez only 4,800 against Michael Wacha, looks pretty good. Franmil Reyes is 3K. We know the kind of power that Reyes has. Wacha this year has allowed a 292 expected ISO to righties. Seems like a pretty good spot for Reyes to hit a home run. So I like going to those guys, but I think it'll probably be more in the sense of like just one-offs or 2-mans than full stacks.
Yeah. And by the way, I see your question in the YouTube chat. Alan S. He was asking about the best cheap pitcher for the early slate on DK. We'll talk about them as we go on. I mean, the real answer is that none of the cheap pitching options look all that great, depending who we're actually considering to be cheap pitcher. But yeah, I mean, I think this is probably a better slate to pay up for some of the starting pitching, but we'll get to those guys as we do. Next matchup here, it is the Atlanta Braves going up against the Pittsburgh Pirates. 2 miserable starting pitchers here. Drew Smyly on one side, Will Crowe on the other side. So first, I'll ask you, do you have any interest in either of the starting pitchers? Assuming the answer is no, which offense do you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, if you have to go to a cheap pitcher, 7,400 for Smyly against the Pirates, I guess is fine. But he has seen a bit of a drop off in his spin rate. Out of the 165 pitchers that I pulled their data from before and after the sticky substance crackdown, Smyly 37th biggest total drop off in spin rate. His fastball's down, his breaking ball's down, and his called plus swing strike percentage has dropped from 28.3% to 24.6%. So all of that's a little bit concerning, especially when you're talking about a pitcher that wasn't very good anyway. And then a 19.5% strikeout percentage since June 6th. Prior to June 6th, he was at about 21.1%. So a slight drop off there. Point being that Pittsburgh's not a great offense. And if you have to go cheap at pitcher, Smiley's okay. But I think you can just find better options on this slate. As far as bats go, I like the Braves here. Will Crow, I think, is decent, but he's not someone that I'm shying away from with a good offense like Atlanta. He's allowed a 254 expected ISO to righties this year. Ronald Acuna, Austin Riley, we know have power from the right side. Orlando Arcia gives you a value option that on DraftKings is third base outfield eligible. Swanson batting sixth, that's power from the right side. And then we know that Freeman and Albies are just good hitters from the left side. So I think Atlanta looks like a good offense.
Yeah, and the field is going to agree with you because right now we have them project for a 21.7% chance or 21.7% ownership share. Even with the number being that high, since this is a smaller slate, 20% chance of being the top stack on DraftKings. It looks like they are about appropriately owned. And then if we go over to FanDuel, where, the slate's a little bit different because this game, it's only a 4-game slate on FanDuel as opposed to a 5-game slate. They do look a little more heavily over-owned on FanDuel, where the ownership is they're in about a fourth of the field's lineup. So ownership, a little bit of a concern here, but considering they're about appropriately owned, I'm probably going to be somewhere around even with the field on them. So the Braves, are you looking to get overweight to them with their high ownership?
I think that, typically when an offense gets to like 20% owned, I don't end up overweight. I could see, again, kind of treating them like we talked about with the Blue Jays, where, going maybe just trying to get home runs. So like grabbing Acuna, grabbing Riley, but not full stacking, I think is one way you could go to still get exposure to them, but, not be competing with a large percentage of the field, 5-man stacking the same team.
Yeah, that's I'm probably going to be around even to maybe a little bit underweight. The only real concern here with the Braves is just so much ownership. That, and it is a park downgrade playing in Pittsburgh. That is one of the better pitchers parks in baseball. So not a spot where I'm going to be. If you want to get overweight to the Braves, you can have them like 30% of your lineups or something like that. So that's something that's a little hard for me to do. But certainly cash games, the Braves are a team that make a lot of sense to load up on. Next game, the Minnesota Twins against Chicago White Sox. In my opinion, Lance Lynn is the best overall pitcher on this slate by a pretty decent margin. And if you look at our top pitchers tool for today, Lance Lynn surprisingly not picking up all that much ownership relative to the slate anyway. 28.6% ownership projection right now for Lance Lynn compared to 36.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. Lance Lynn is the best pitcher and the best player overall to roster on the early slate, any position.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's there's pitching I like on the slate, but they're not on the same level as Lance Lynn is. The matchup against Minnesota can be tough, but there's strikeouts to be had here as well. Still waiting on that Minnesota lineup. They got Nelson Cruz back yesterday. Josh Donaldson still wasn't back. If Donaldson's out, that takes another really good hitter out of the lineup for Minnesota. Although I guess you could argue it takes some strikeouts out as well. But Lynn, no argument here. 10K is a very reasonable price tag.
Yeah, Lance Lynn's numbers so far this year been really solid, even since the crackdown on foreign substances. He's still found success overall for the year. 2.02 ERA, 2.82 expected ERA. Something else with Lance Lynn I've been bringing up in some of his recent starts. He used to be a guy who to find upside just had to work deep into games because he was never really much of a strikeout guy. But 28.9% K rate this year, so the strikeout numbers are up. To me, I think the 2 best pitchers in the American League right now are on the same team. It's Lance Lynn and Carlos Rodon from the White Sox. I think those are should be the 2 front runners to win the American League Cy Young. If you go to sportsbooks, Garrett Cole is still listed as the favorite, which, given some of his struggles recently, I don't think should be the case. So Lance Lynn, to me, I really like getting to him on this slate. The matchup against the Twins is not ideal, but still, you compare it to the other pitching options on the slate, and the guys that we're paying up for, it's either Lance Lynn, Casey Mize, Kyle Gibson. And to me, Lance Lynn offers a lot more strikeout upside than those guys. The only real concern to a smaller extent would be the matchup because the Twins have a good offense, but would you be looking to stack the Twins at all just for leverage purposes?
With Lynn getting only about 26% ownership right now, I'm not that interested in going to Minnesota. They themselves have about a 7.5% chance of being the top stack. We actually just got their lineup. No Josh Donaldson. Very lefty heavy lineup, which does typically drive down the strikeout totals for Lynn. He has about a 22.5% strikeout percentage against lefties this year, compared to 35.3% against righties. But he's still done a pretty good job limiting power. 123 ISO, 177 expected ISO. So unless his ownership comes up, I don't think I'll be getting to a lot of Minnesota.
Yeah, that's let's see. So Minnesota most recent run, we have them with 7.4% chance to be the top stack of the slate. So the Twins have the lowest odds of being the top stack for any team that's playing a full 9-inning game. So the only teams below them, the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cleveland Indians, but both those teams playing against each other in a 7-inning game that's a doubleheader. So Twins, to me, they don't look like a team that I really want to target heavily. Lance Lynn, somebody who I do want to target very heavily as a pitcher. But going against him on the other side, Michael Pineda, somebody who it's going to be a little hard to know what to make of him just because he's coming off the injured list. Pineda's been hurt a whole bunch this year, and he's somebody who, even when he's been active, I've been waiting for him to regress because ERA this year, 3.7, expected ERA 4.91. So he appears to be somebody who's heading towards some pretty heavy regression. He only has a 252 BABIP. That's something that's going to come down. He also has a 78% strand rate, so he's been really lucky in terms of sequencing. So I like stacking against Michael Pineda for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think he was due for regression anyway, but then also him coming off the injured list. Also, he struggled with injuries a decent amount over the last 6 weeks or so. I like stacking against Michael Pineda here, and I'm not sure that's something the field is going to do a ton.
I did until I saw the garbage lineup the White Sox were using.
Let's see. It came out just now. So
yeah. Tim Anderson, Gavin Sheets, Jose Abreu, Brian Goodwin. Okay, fine, whatever. Adam Engel, Louis Garcia, Jake Berger, Billy Hamilton, Sebi Zavala.
Word. Let's see. So yeah, I'm looking at that lineup now. All right. So does that make you want to get to Pineda at all? I mean, I was thinking I was going to be stacking the White Sox, but now I don't like them nearly as much because we just got that lineup. Literally, as I was talking about them as a play, the lineup came out as I was talking. It was the thing where I was like, hey, I like the White Sox. And the White Sox were like, hey, not so much.
Yeah.
Look at what we're doing today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in Pineda if he's a full go, but we don't really have any way of knowing that. At 7K, I mean, I guess it's still kind of worth the gamble. Just like when you look in that price range, Mejia and Waka are nothing that I'm interested in. Smiley's very, very marginal. Brady Singer isn't it's not like he's in a great spot. So, I mean, I guess you could just make some lineups where you're hoping Pineda gets 75, 80 pitches and mows down this terrible White Sox lineup. But I think mostly on this slate, I don't think I'll need to go that cheap a pitcher. I think I'll be able to get, some combination of Lynn, Gibson, Gray, and just move on.
Yeah, I'm looking. So let's see. The last time Pineda started was
June 13th through 64 pitches.
Okay, so this is going to be very narrative based, but Michael Pineda is one of the only pitchers who's actually gotten suspended in recent memory for using sticky substance. Remember when he was on the Yankees, he had it on his glove. So it stands to reason, and we don't have any data from him really since the crackdown because he was on the injured list. It's been so long since he started. It stands to reason he's been using substances for the last, couple of years, does it not?
Yeah, probably his whole career. And this is a very, very small sample, but if you use June 6th as the date, like to do before and after, he made 2 starts since then, one against the Yankees, one against Houston. So matchups where you would kind of expect him to struggle anyway. But his called strike plus swinging strike percentage did drop 5.5 points compared to in the starts previously.
We have him projected for 40% ownership now. This is a garbage White Sox lineup, but I don't want to roster Michael Pineda anywhere near the field as at 40%. I might still stack up the White Sox just for leverage purposes if that number stays at 40%. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I didn't realize he was 40%. That makes the White Sox interesting if I were in the lineup.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, so right now, the top pitcher switch is free today. If you guys go check that out. The most rostered pitchers right now on the early slate, it is tied at the top. Michael Pineda, 38.6%. Kyle Gibson also at 38.6%. Then the third most rostered starting pitcher is Lance Lynn at 26.7%. And then Drew Smiley against the Pittsburgh Pirates at 26%. So those are your most popular pitching options on the slate. To me, pretty clearly, the two best ones are Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn. You would say that, hey, Greg, that makes sense. That's what everybody in the field is going to be doing. But kind of based on the ownership, Gibson's popular, except there's still, Pineda is a lot more popular than Lance Lynn. We have Drew Smiley with about the same ownership as Lance Lynn. Sonny Gray is about the same ownership as Lance Lynn. So it's not like there's some sort of crazy chalk going to Lance Lynn. So yeah, I have a lot of concerns about Michael Pineda. So with that in mind, the 40% projected ownership for him, that's a number I want to be underweight to field on. And I'm going to be stacking up the White Sox a little bit just to gain some leverage. Next game here, Texas Rangers up against the Detroit Tigers. Kyle Gibson's also going to be a very popular pitcher. And Gibson is somebody who also has had some kind of weird results this year because he's never had that much success as a starting pitcher until this year. And he's not just having some success, he's having a ton of 1.98 ERA, 3.3 expected ERA. The strikeouts still aren't there, which, generally be a little bit of concern for me to pay up for him. But on a short slate where he has a favorable matchup against the Tigers, and there aren't that many other pitching options to go to, I think Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson are the two safest pitching options today.
Yeah, I like Gibson here. Just, pretty good at getting outs, preventing runs. I wish the strikeout stuff were better. I wish he'd throw his breaking stuff more, but he doesn't. But it is a good matchup here against the Tigers. I wish there were one or two more righties in this lineup, but, again, they're still not a very good offense. So only, limited options here. I think Gibson's fine.
Yeah, and then Gibson also, this is kind of related, but kind of unrelated to this. I hope he gets traded to the National League just because I have bets on Carlos Rodon and Lance Lynn to win Cy Young. And Kyle Gibson, there's no way he could keep this up, but I'm a little concerned. If he keeps getting lucky for another 10 starts, just given how bad the pitching is, he kind of back himself into a Cy Young award in the American League. So just trade him to the National League. Don't mess up with my bets. That's really what I feel like. That would be a worst case scenario for me, is Kyle Gibson winning Cy Young, because I don't think he's that caliber of pitcher, except, he's kind of pitched like it so far this year, plus matchup against the Tigers. So any interest in stacking the Tigers for you?
Not really. I don't think you're going to get enough. I mean, 40% ownership's a lot on Gibson, but I just hate this Tigers lineup so much. So if you're playing if you're playing 150 lineups in a large field, top heavy tournament, I think you probably should have some Tiger stacks. If you're playing 3 max, 4 max, 10 lineups, I wouldn't worry about the Tigers.
All right. And then starting for Detroit, Casey Mize. He has had better results this year with a 3.55 ERA, but you look at the underlying numbers for Mize, 5.11 expected ERA, 4.56 FIP. Strikeout numbers just haven't been there for him this year. He's not striking all that many guys out. So with Casey Mize, I still think he's somebody to bet on the arm talent going forward. But, former number 1 overall pick in the draft in 2018, he's still only 24 years old. He has really good stuff. He throws hard, 94.4 average fastball velocity. But given the fact that he only has a 20.2% K rate this year, it was 19.5% last year, Casey Mize is somebody who I have trouble trusting. And if you look at our projections for the day, there's very little ownership going to Mize, but I kind of think that's justified. He's not somebody that I like getting to.
I kind of like him in tournaments at 2% owned, just because he is facing Texas. And I mean, the Rangers have a 4.4 implied run total. That's not low, but it's not high. If you look at the bats in this lineup since the start of 2019, the only 3 hitters that have been above average against right-handed pitching are Nate Lowe, Adolis Garcia, and Joey Gallo. If you can just kind of navigate that middle part of the order, this Rangers team will give you strikeouts. Like you said, Mize has really good stuff. He just hasn't really turned it into consistent success in the major leagues yet. But it's so hard to get low-owned pitchers on a 5-game slate that have any sort of talent whatsoever. To me, it's just, I think Kyle Gibson's good. I think Kyle Gibson's matchup is good. Do I really think Kyle Gibson is beating Casey Mize 19 out of every 20 times on the slate? I think the answer is pretty strongly no. So I do have interest as long as the ownership stays there. If you were to even get him at 10% or something like that, I start to lose interest pretty quickly. But if we assume that the ownership projection is correct and that Mize is somewhere around 2, 3, 4%, I think that's lower than he really should be on this slate, given us a relatively good matchup against the Rangers.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I'm just going to refresh the ownership here and see if we have anything different. Yeah, but not significant. Casey Mize now project for 3% ownership. So, still fairly low. So, yeah, I don't have an issue with having him more than 3%. But once again, if you're somebody who doesn't play a ton of lineups, that's not a spot where I'd consider Mize. But yeah, I didn't have Mize in my player pool, but now that Adam's brought that up, I think it's a good point. I'll get to a little bit of Casey Mize in tournaments just for the low ownership. Final game on the slate that we have here, the Cincinnati Reds going up against the Kansas City Royals. Now, for this spot, the Reds are actually my favorite stack overall in the early slate. Brady Singer, not that he's the worst pitcher or anything like that, but if you look at our top stacks tool, the Reds have the best positive leverage score of any stack. Right now, have the Reds 13.4% projected ownership, 17.9% chance of being a top stack. I'd really like to get that kind of positive differential. Then if you look over at FanDuel for the early slate, we have the Reds look like a really good pivot off of the Atlanta Braves, because we have the Braves with a 20.3% chance to be the top stack on FanDuel. The Reds fairly comparable at 19.7% chance. The difference, though, the Braves are picking up 25.5% projected ownership compared to 16% projected ownership for the Reds. So as of right now, the Reds look like they're going to be my most rostered stack.
Yeah, I like it. I don't think Brady Singer's terrible either, but they are projected to go under owned. They have a 5.1 implied run total. I like the lineup they're running out. You know, you get the three right-handed bats in the top six all give you upside in India, Stevenson, and Suarez. But Singer has struggled in particular with left-handed power this year. 175 expected ISO to lefties compared to 0.087 against righties. And you're getting Jesse Winker, Joey Votto, Tyler Naquin, and Tucker Barnhart in the top seven from the left side. So I think it's a pretty good lineup for Cincinnati in this spot. And as long as the ownership stays where it is, I think they'll pick a good stack as well.
Yeah, and then starting for Cincinnati, Sonny Gray. I think he's going a little bit under owned here. Only 24.4% projected ownership. Sonny Gray came off the injured list last start. Didn't show any ill effects at all. Maybe his pitch count wasn't totally extended going up against the Cubs. He only threw 86 pitches. But, you know, with that in mind, that was his first start in, about a month? Yeah, so Sonny Gray went a month in between starts, comes back. There was 86 pitches. I expect him to be back to, 90, 95 pitches today, considering he scored 21.7 DraftKings points last time out against the Cubs. I have no real significant concerns with him here. The pitching options are fairly weak today. 8,300 for Sonny Gray. That's a pretty high priority play for me at pitching.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about a lot of things regarding Sonny Gray here. For one, why he's $8,300. For two, why his ownership is only 24% on DraftKings. For three, I don't understand why the Royals implied run total is 4.5. I don't really understand any of this. But like you said, he threw 86 pitches last game, which I kind of laughed because like the write-up on DraftKings says that he was limited to 86 pitches and that he'll likely be limited going forward. You can limit my starting pitcher to 90 pitches. I don't care. You're just taking him out and you're not putting him out there for that last inning where he gets lit up. So like, thank you for doing me a favor. 86 pitches and now probably talking 90, 95. That's not a relevant pitch limit for DFS. He's not priced up. He has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate this year. On this slate, he has the highest strikeout percentage at 30.8%. It's 2 points higher than Lance Lynn, who's $2,000 more expensive. His xFIP is better than Lance Lynn at 309. He's a really, really, really good pitcher facing a Kansas City team that, they have some dangerous bats, but they're not an overall good offense. I don't really understand anything about this game other than that I think I want more Sonny Gray than the field.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. Sonny Gray is going to be pretty high priority pitching play for me. Overall, he's my third favorite pitching option on the slate. So just going through, we could do a quick summary here before logging off. But for the early slate, my three favorite pitchers are Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson, and Sonny Gray. And Lance Lynn and Sonny Gray, given the quality of pitchers they are, small slate where there aren't that many pitching options. I mean, these guys both being sub 30% owned on a 5-game slate doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I like both of that. I like in Sonny Gray and Lance Lynn, that is. Kyle Gibson, I think he brings a lot of security. And then in terms of stacks, the Reds, just relative to what the ownership are, that is my favorite stack. So, Adam, I'll ask you something similar to close us up. Who are a couple of your favorite pitching options and then highest priority stack for you?
Yeah, favorite pitching options, Lynn, Gray, Gibson. And I guess the caveat to me ranting about Sonny Gray for anyone that's not familiar, I've kind of just loved Sonny Gray for years. And so I always find reasons to like him. But I think this is another spot to go to him. So I really like him here. As far as stacks go, I'm with you on Cincinnati. I think they look like the best in terms of their chance of success versus ownership. The White Sox, I hate the lineup, but we still have them with the third highest top stack percentage. And we know that we have Pineda projected for ownership. So I think they look pretty good too, if that holds.
Yeah. And then one quick thing. So Dylan in the YouTube chat had asked, is Indian Rays not postponed because of the hurricane? Yesterday's game got postponed, moved to today. That's why they're playing a doubleheader. So, guys, that is going to do it for us. Thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring the show. If you guys are new to PrizePicks, head on over to PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code Awesemo and get a $100 bonus on your first deposit. So, guys, that'll do it for us. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video. Tyler, play the music.